أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to Tuesday night program of Tawassul. Before I begin, there's a request for Surah Fatiha, as it is the Surah Fatiha for Marhuma, mother of Brother Ishad Haji. I believe it's her birthday. It was her birthday yesterday or today. So Fatima Haji, please recite Surah Fatiha for her as well as their other deceased relatives as well as yours. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give a marhuma a place in the Jawar of Masumeen alayhi salatu wassalam, elevate her status and give patience and solace to the bereaved family. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك وأتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله يا إمام الرحمة يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد يا قرة عين الرسول يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة عند الله اشفعي لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا توسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها الكاظم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وسي الحسن والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. Ask for your hajat from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remember those who we've lost recently in your du'as. Marhum Ayatullah Sheikh Sani'i, who passed away earlier this week, as well as Marhum Sayyid Zamir Akhtar Nakhwi, who passed away a couple of days ago in Pakistan, as well as Marhuma Fatma Haji, for whom we recited Surah Fatiha earlier. Please remember these Marhumin in your prayers. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا سادتي وموالي إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وعدتي ليوم فقري وحاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله فاشفعوا لي إن الله واستنقذوني من ذنوبي إن الله فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو نجاة من الله فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا سادتي يا أولياء الله صلى الله عليهم أجمعين ولعن الله أعداء الله ظالميهم من الأولين والآخرين آمين رب العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. لأرواح المؤمنين المؤمنات فاتحة. Inshallah, before I begin, about 15 minutes that I have until 9 o'clock. Once again, let's just recite 5 times Amiji for all of those people who are suffering, who are in need of dua, whether physically, financially, spiritually. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring them out of these difficulties. Let's recite 5 times. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Amman yujibu al-muftarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su'. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 ويجعلكم خلفاء الأرض أإله مع الله قليلا ما تذكرون. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وقوله الحق وهو أصدق القائلين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I recited this verse from Surah Fussilat, ayat number 34, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, virtue and evil are not equal. If you replace evil habits by virtuous ones, you will certainly find that your enemies will become your intimate friends. The reason that I chose this ayat in the brief discussion that I have, as we are going through these ayyam-e-azah, we find that there's so much hatred around the globe. There's so much hatred of different type and different kinds that exist. Could be because of jealousy, could be because of envy, could be because of other various reasons. So how do you define hate? And secondly, why do you see this hatred against the Shias that is coming out, especially in Pakistan, with all of these slogans against the Shias, calling them to be out of the bounds of Islam? We would like to introduce a concept, and we've discussed it the other week as well, last Thursday, where we talked about the idea where did Yazid repent? And tonight I want to go a little bit deeper. We see that many in history couldn't comprehend Imam Hussein's mission. That's why they questioned his rise against Yazid's allegiance. Imam, when he declined to give hand and declined to pay allegiance to him, there were many people who questioned Imam's reasoning. And it's surprising that I said, well, still we feel there's element of being just in the people for something so black and white. Yet we find that their books after books are written to support this creature who stood up against Imam Hussein, thinking that he could go through the family of the Holy Prophet like he would go through anyone else, and it would be unnoticed. But he faced it. After a few years, you saw what happened. But there are people who have written books after books trying to cover up for those crimes. And majority of these scholars who were not so much biased, and there wasn't much prejudice, and they were easily very comfortable in condemning those who were wrong and praising those who were correct, and proving the fact that Yazid, of course, was mal'oon, condemned, and things that he did were outside of the realm of Islam or of humanity for that matter. So here, in order to understand this hatred that is coming out now, look at the pyramid of hate. First level is bias. The base of the pyramid is when our prejudice is expressed through jokes and criticism and other expressions of our bias. It feels harmless, but quickly moves to the next level of individual acts of prejudice. So you start from bias, could be from joke or criticism, which then leads to eventually prejudice. The prejudice turns into this rejection. And then the third level is discrimination that follows. The middle of the pyramid involves intentional discrimination. That sometimes unwittingly, a person then would go ahead and intentionally start discriminating in order to prove their, even if they're wrong, in order to stand up and prove what they were standing by is correct. And the fourth level is bias motivated violence, which you just saw and you heard in the news, that rallies are taken out against the Shias, and in it, because of the words and the speech of hate speech of some pseudo scholars. I don't want to call them scholars within our own circle, who gave some fiery speeches, who gave some hate speeches, of course stating the obvious, but these things are not permissible according to the top leadership, and that resulted in what you're seeing today. Therefore, that bias motivated violence was up for display. This level is when discrimination becomes a social movement. Masses, most of the time encouraged by leaders, attack properties, holy places, or groups. When a society gets to this level 4, things are getting out of hands. That's the danger of letting hate become something normal. For them, it is something which is absolutely fine. I don't want to get into the fifth level of it. Fifth level, unfortunately, is genocide. Genocide, as defined by United Nations in 1948, means acts committed with intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Includes both physical and mental harm. Now let me bring you back to Karbala. Imam alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, وَلَمَّا قَتَلَ أَصْحَابَهُ وَأَهْلَ بَيْتِهِ وَلَمْ يَبْقَى أَحَدٌ عَزِمَ عَلَى لِقَاءِ اللَّهِ توجه نحو القوم وقال. When Imam's ashab were killed, his Ahl Bayt were killed, and nobody remained, and Imam intended to go and meet and have this liqa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he turned toward these people and he said to them, وَيْلُكُمْ أَلَا مَا تُقَاتِلُونِ. Why are you killing me? فَبِمَا تَسْتَحِلُّونَ دَمِي. Why have you made my blood halal upon you? أَلَا حَقٍّ تَرَكْتُهُ أَمْ عَلَى شَرِيَةٍ بَدَّلْتُهَا أَمْ عَلَى سُنَّةٍ غَيَّرْتُهَا. Have I failed to pay back someone's rights? Have I changed the Shariat? Have I transformed the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet? They replied, because of the hatred we have for your father, Ali ibn Abi Talib. What do they say? This is present in the books of history. فَقَالُوا نُقَاتِلُكَ بُغْضًا مِنَّا لِأَبِيكَ وَمَا فَعَلَ بِأَشْيَاخِنَا يَوْمَ بَدْرٍ وَحُنَيْنٍ. We are fighting you because of the grudge and the bulls that we have for your father and what he did with our ashiyakh, that means our ancestors, on the day of Badr and in the battle of Hunayn. فَلَمَّا سَمِعَ كَلَامَهُمْ. When Imam heard their kalam, baka, Imam wept. وَجَعَلَ يَحْمِلُ عَلَيْهِمْ وَجَعَلُوا يَنْهَزِمُونَ مِنْ بَيْنِ يَدَيْهِ كَأَنَّهُمُ الْجُرَادُ الْمُنْتَشَرُ. Imam was able to understand his enemy, and their corruption was, with insight. There was this basirat, unfortunately, in their hatred. What was the basirat? That we're standing here because we have hatred for your father. Because of what your father did to our forefathers, our ancestors, this is the reason we're here. But we see that Imam ﷺ looks at their intention, which awakened the mankind from deep slumber. He wanted them to say these things. He wanted them to utter these words so that you understand what these people were standing up for. This feature of his bamboozled everyone, even the enemy, with all of his hatred. Just look at the incident when he took his 6-month-old, asking for water. Did Imam really think that the ones who have killed Ali Akbar Qasim, Aun Muhammad, Abbas, even the youngest of the young and the eldest of the eldest, everyone has been killed. You think that they will have any humanity in them to bring water? Was Imam really worried about bringing water to Ali Asghar? Was he really thinking of getting any water? If Imam wanted, he could have quenched the thirst of Ali Asghar. But the problem here is to, again, awaken the conscience of the people at that time, and whoever reads about it, their conscience are also awakened. This is probably the most difficult of all incidents in Karbala. Yet we don't hear a pungent of immoral expression from him. Imagine, you've lost all the elders. You understand that this is what these people have come here to do. But to take the life of a 6-month-old, still Imam does not utter any immoral expression for him. Rather, Imam used the method of exhorting and well-wishing for his enemy. Not only Imam, but his companions were also, well, you say, well, Imam was Imam, Masoom, that's the reason. He had absolute composure and sabr, and he knew what he was doing. But even his companions were able to deal with the worst of their political enemies with dignity and honor and face them with compassion. Itfa billati hiya ahsanu sayyi'a. Nahnu a'lamu bima yasifun. Respond to the injustice done to you with the better deed. We know best what they attribute to God. And today the message is the same for all of those people who might be in front line and maybe facing, we are of course not facing that hatred directly. It is not directed toward us, but we're all, one body, one jism. If a body part is hurting, we feel the pain for them. But still respond to the injustice done to you with the better deed. Imam Hussein had all the intentions to save the people from the wrath of Allah. For this reason, he chose the most severe conditions for himself and his family. Imam even spoke gently and advised those who had intentions of severing his head, eventually which they did. But when he saw that it's not possible to save them all, what they were saying and what they were doing, from the wrath of the hereafter, he tried to lower their torment so that their azab may be limited. We see this especially in interference to a person by the name Harthuma ibn Abi Muslim. When Imam's advice wasn't beneficial to him, Imam requested him to get away, go as far away as possible from this land so that you won't hear the istighasa that will be raised by Imam. Similar was the case with Ubaidullah ibn Hurra Jofi. So we understand here the purpose, the values that Imam Hussein was standing for. And we see what this hatred is causing today. This biased this bias that has become prejudice, and then eventually this prejudice turns violent discrimination that leads to violence and genocide. Inshallah, it will not lead to that genocide or discrimination. It will remain there, and of course the haqq will prevail, and all of the efforts are being done by the top leadership in Pakistan and wherever this hatred is being displayed to diffuse this unwarranted situation. Of course, there are bigger aims, and these people are being played by other players who want to achieve something else. Their objective is something else. But of course, yes, there was wrongdoing by certain individual who said a few things which they should not have said. They went against the commands and the teachings of our maraji, and we should really look up for their leadership. They have kept us away from harm's way for the past 1100 years, ever since the ghaibat of Imam of the time. And therefore we should put our faith into them, and we should believe in what they're saying. That's why when you see certain people come up to the minbar and they try to diffuse the situation by calling for unity, calling for ittihad, and calling for coming together and having a dialogue, there are certain things that you will never be able to convince the enemy. You'll never be able to convince the other side. I shouldn't use the word enemy. Enemy is someone who's outside of the realm of Islam, who wants to break this religion, this great religion. And to an extent, they've been able to penetrate. And therefore, this is important that every century, every decade, we've been able to defeat this hatred with love, with the with the ahsan, and the best of the ways, as this ayat which I had recited for you. And we continue to have this faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we will be able to come out of this situation, inshallah, with our heads high. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq and ability to be steadfast in this difficult time, especially give strength to our brothers and sisters who are facing this onslaught, and they're in the harm's way more than ever. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep them protected. And hopefully this would be the reason for the reappearance of our awaited Imam, for whom we've been making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes his reappearance as soon as possible. Wa akhir dawana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.